Welcome back to Painter's Garage. In the last video, I introduced the 72 Vega GT project. In this video, we've got a lot to get done, so let's jump right in. This is the bell housing that you want if you're going to keep the cable actuated clutch on a Vega. So this is a Chevy Monza V8 bell housing. I'm not going to use this. I was lucky to come by this bell housing. I have not been lucky enough to find the clutch fork. The pivot ball is here instead of the traditional location right here. That allows you to reverse the actuation so that it pulls it instead of pushes it. So my fix for this is I picked up just a very common bell housing here. It can handle the bigger 168 and the smaller 153 tooth flywheel. They are very cheap because there are a lot of different brands that remanufacture them. This one here I got off of eBay. It was $80 roughly. Comes with the clutch fork, the pivot ball. It even has the fork boot and the dust shield. All I got to do is put it all together. I did have to order a flywheel for this. This is just stock replacement parts. This is all this is. Same exact thing for the clutch. I opted to use a 1987 Chevy pickup truck with a 4-speed manual. And with those, it's actually a heavy-duty Granny Low SM465. They do have the same spline size and spline count as your Saginaw 4-speeds, so it will work just fine. I'll go ahead and chuck this on there so that I can get started on making a clutch actuation system. So I've got my clutch actuation system all mocked up here, and it's in the rough, but I'll show you guys how it's going to work. So we'll be reusing the factory clutch pedal assembly. It just uses a cable that attaches right there, and it wraps around this pulley and goes back up out through the firewall. Normally it's about twice as long. It wraps down around here and goes down to the bell housing, but I'm not going to do that. I decided to do it this way. So this is a, well, actually, I probably can't use that word on YouTube. They'd probably get mad at me. For this video's purposes, we'll call that a servant cylinder, and we'll call that a Lord cylinder. This servant cylinder here came off of a 1997 Honda Civic. It's slightly modified. Normally there's a spring in there that kind of pushes on this little piston that's in here. I pulled the spring out, and then there's a little tab also that normally is behind it to prevent coil bind, and so that tab has been cut off as well. That just gives me a little bit more throw out of this thing because I need a whole bunch, because the clutch in this thing needs a ton of throw to disengage it. I made this little bracket here. It's in the rough, it's just tacked in, but I utilized the Z-bar attachment here, and then I utilized the little bolt there for the bell housing. So I cut down my cable. It was kind of frayed anyways past this point, so cut it off. That way I didn't have to do a loop-de-loop. This is the clutch pedal assembly out of a, you guessed it, 1997 Honda Civic. All I did was I flipped the Lord cylinder upside down. This would normally go up under the car, and then your pedal, oh, where's the pedal? There it is. It would have went like that, so I just cut that off. This Lord cylinder is actually a brake Lord cylinder, not a clutch. I tried to use the factory clutch Lord cylinder out of the 97 Civic, and I just wasn't getting enough fluid flow in order to push my servant cylinder far enough. It's a bigger bore for one, and we're actually using 2 circuits off of this. Now, Those two circuits are going into right now this. This is a pressure differential valve. I had it just laying around. This one's out of a 1973 Honda Civic. I'm just using this as a T. I'll eventually get a T that's not, you know, this. It's a little bit of a mess right now, but it'll get cleaned up. Overall, this is pretty much how it's going to work. It's actually relatively easy to push the pedal, which is what I was going for. Moving on. Engine's back in now, and everything fits reasonably well. This manifold here is probably what I'll end up running. We'll see. Bell housing clears pretty well, except right there, it's pretty close to it. So next time the engine's back out, I'll probably do a little bit more massaging right there. On this side for the exhaust, I have an original manifold. The exit is just not going to work out. So I bought this early factory header for the driver's side, hoping it would fit with no modification, but the number one primary tube was very close to the steering shaft, and the collector wasn't at a great angle. So I decided to start chopping it up and build my own header using scrap pieces and some junk headers I had laying around. What I'm going to do now is just clean up the weld on the inside here. I'm not going to get too crazy with it. As you can see right here, you know, this is how much I took off of it and just got it all good and smooth. I'm using a gasket here to kind of figure out where I need to grind. I'll just clean all that up and it'll have a nice smooth transition. I wanted to show you guys how I'm doing the collector on this. I just took myself a piece of 2.5-inch pipe, cut it down a line like this, cut a little relief in it this way, fold it out that way, fold this one out this way. What I'll do now is just make a little triangle piece to go right here to fill this in. Well, here it is, pretty much all done. I reckon I will still go ahead and finish cleaning it up and shoot some sort of a coating or a paint on here. Don't usually recommend making your own header unless you've got a lot of time on your hands. At the end of the day though, it's worth it when you got a really tight engine bay like this and you need something to fit just right. This is a shifter out of a second gen F-body car, so Camaros, Firebirds. This one fits reasonably well, except for it comes really close to the dash. What I'll do is cut it, clock it like this, and that should be enough room for me. This is an actual cue ball. I found it in the trunk of this Vega, and I figured it must have been on the car at one point. Maybe, maybe not. So we'll keep it with the car. I went ahead and tapped it. It was drilled already, but for some reason it wasn't tapped. That or the threads were pulled, I don't know. So went ahead and tapped it, and we'll reuse it. I went ahead and test fit it real fast, and I think I would actually like it better if I went ahead and angled it so that the shifter just sat pretty much perfectly straight, because it was like this. So now I'm going to move it like this and get it straight this way, but I'm also going to go like this. I'll probably go ahead and just bring the welder in here real fast, hold it where it feels right, and then go ahead and tack it in, and then quickly pull the shifter back out so I don't melt the rubber bushing in there. That's good enough for me. Let's see how this bad boy fits. Oh, that looks perfect. Yeah. A little bit loose. Probably won't be once the retainer or the little clips in there. It's perfect. Plenty of room in the dash. Uh-oh, my linkage came off. Real fast, I'll show you guys what I'm gonna do for a transmission mount. So I went digging through my parts, and this is the original transmission crossmember. And I stuck it up where it would go, and I found that it actually lined up really good. So I went out and I bought this transmission mount here. It's a fairly common one with the single stud coming out the bottom. And the part number for this specific one is A2360. If you get this exact one from O'Reilly's, it is $5, or at least that's how much it was whenever I bought it. So can't beat that. I ended up making this little adapter bracket right here. I've got this tightened down where it needs to be so that this hole lines up with that mount, and that's really all there was to it. Just line this up, put our bolts in to hold it. There we go. Tighten them up, and that's it. Since this drive shaft is shortened up, I can move on to adapting the U-joint to work with this factory Vega rear end. To do that, I have to use a conversion U-joint because this drive shaft is out of a mid-70s, like a 75 or 76 Chevy Monte Carlo, and it uses a much different U-joint. Common stuff from the late 60s and early 70s was your 13 series U-joints. So you got your 1310, your 1330, and your 1350. And it's really easy and very common to convert between those. This is none of those. This is commonly referred to as an S44 or a 3R U-joint. It's got the big 1 1/8 inch caps, and it has a much larger width than what this Vega had from the factory. The Vega came with the most common small U-joint, which was a 1310. And so to convert all this together, I use this U-joint here. Part number on this particular one is a 372. And here is that. As you can see, it's a staggered U-joint. We got the big length here and the big caps to go into the drive shaft, which is the S44 3R. And then we have the narrow small cap that goes to the factory Vega rear end, which is the 1310. This is actually, believe it or not, a factory part on some cars. These U-joints were used on some late 50s and early 60s Oldsmobiles and 1988, I believe, to 1992 F-bodies. Enough chitter chatter, I will go ahead and knock this dude out, put this one in, and after that, the drive shaft is done. Nice. This is an aftermarket HEI. Now to hook one of these up, all you really need is some wire and one of these female terminals. Plugs in right here, and that's it. Now, you'll just run this to switch power. Got my fuel here. Those of you that are concerned about it, I've got these new see-through clear exhaust manifolds on here. I got the new Bluetooth water pump belt. Let's see if this thing will run. Maybe we should throw a throttle body on there. Get the plug wires out of the way of the invisible manifolds. There we go. I had it 180 out. You know, you'd think I'd learned my lesson and check that, but I always go, it's just 50-50. Not a big deal. We'll pop it out, get it straight. Slide this guy out, turn that pointer this direction, and see. Right there, actually. That'd be good. Now, as you can see, it's not lined up with the oil pump. but that's not a problem. And all you gotta do is, if you look here, put some pressure downwards on your distributor, spin the thing over, and it'll drop right in. Let's just sit it right in the middle, see how it does. You got a fire extinguisher? Yep, on it. I think it wants a little bit more advance. It'll stop smoking eventually. All right. Works for me. Well, that rear main seal sure leaked an awful lot for having ran for 15 seconds. So I figured I'd go ahead and show you guys the intake I'm going to use on this. Some of you are looking at this and you're going, hey, that just looks like a Edelbrock Performer 2111. And technically, you'd be correct. But it's not quite. So this is, as far as I can tell, a very early edition of the Edelbrock Performer for a 90-degree V6. It even says on here, Performer 229, which was the V6 that was used on cars before the 4.3 came out, which makes me think that this is actually quite old. You can still buy an Edelbrock 2111, but it's not like this. The 2111s that you can buy nowadays are better described, in my opinion, as a divided single plane. What I mean by saying this is all the cylinders on this side are fed right here, and all of them right here are fed right here. On this intake, all of these runners on here, on this side, are fed by this side, and all of the runners on this side are fed by this side. This gives you a much longer intake runner. The new 2111s will have short little runners, and normally you will have a short runner for high RPM power, whereas you'll have a longer runner for your torque production. And these engines don't really rev all that high to begin with. Even if you put a much bigger cam in them, it's not typical to rev them much past 6,000 or so. Not to say that you can't, you can, but they don't usually make a whole lot past that if you're running stock heads and stuff like that. This, I think, is probably going to be a little bit better throughout the entire RPM range. You can see here, it's got quite a bit of pitting and corrosion. Nothing a little bit of JB weld and some sanding can't fix, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. The original intake ports on it are pretty tiny compared to the cylinder head ports. So what I'm going to do with this thing, this right here is a set of intake gaskets. As you can see there, we've got quite a huge amount difference between the gasket and the intake. Some of you would be like, well, you should probably go ahead and gasket match the intake manifold, but I'm not going to do that, and let me show you why. We come around here to the cylinder head. The gasket matches with the cylinder head pretty well. We do have this sort of bridge here that's not represented very well by the gasket, so we have to measure this to see how much we really have to work with the intake. The port shape on the cylinder head, well, it necks down quite a bit to go around the push rod, as you can see here. So there's quite a bit of meat right there. I'm not gonna port these heads. I'm just gonna leave these as they are. So as far as this side here of the port, with these two, it's this side and that side. I'm not going to do any material removal, or not much material removal between that. So right now, this is our cylinder head port, sort of. On the far side here, it's got this little ramp sort of thing. And currently, it goes something more like this. What we'll do is sort of open these up so that we have something a bit more like this. And that'll be good enough for me. What I'm not gonna do is port the intake right here and create basically this balloon shape. To take this much material out of the intake manifold would take a really, really long time. I think in a perfect world, it would be better to actually fill this in, but we're not gonna do all that. I got a good amount of meat I can take out here between these two ports. And then what I'll do is I'll match this port to the size that these ports are when I'm done with these. When it's all said and done, it'll be like this side here. We've gone to the gasket on the top, to the gasket on the bottom. We've opened this up quite a bit, and we've matched this one to the size of these ports. Real fast, I'll show you guys a couple of things I've done, and that is make my alternator bracket assembly. I found that if I made some little brackets here to go straight down to the engine mount, it actually lined up really well. You do want it to be lined up reasonably close, or you'll have issues with it throwing the belt, squeaking, or premature wear of your belt. Now, I think I've got it pretty darn close, but I suppose we'll find out. I went ahead and made this little dude right here to mount my turnbuckle to. I started off with just one of these guys. This is the factory spacer for the alternators. What I did was I just cut it down and used the little tab off here to mount my turnbuckle to. I welded a little piece of rod on the backside here so that that would be what, you know, prevents this from wanting to go like this. And then I did drill and tap the alternator. These normally come from the factory with a 5/16 coarse thread bolt. I like to have something a little bit more beefy than that, so I drilled it and tapped it for a 3/8 course. And then on the bottom, I've just got a bolt going into the cylinder head and a couple washers and some bushings and whatnot so that it was all located correctly. It does have a little bit of movement, not much. The movement's actually in this motor mount, and I really didn't expect it to have any movement, but I suppose if it's good enough to mount the engine, it's good enough to mount the alternator. I did have to do a little bit of massaging on my valve cover over here. Not a whole lot, just a tiny bit to give me some room for the alternator. I didn't want it to be hanging way off to the side. I'm sure you guys already guessed what carburetor was going on here. That is correct, in Edelbrock Performer. I picked this one up from a swap meet because it was dirt cheap and it fits really good with this really short V6. You can run a Holley or just your typical, 4150 style carburetor on these. If you have a small cap distributor, you could probably run a Holley. If you have an HEI to run a Holley, you're probably going to have to put a really tall spacer. Got some lock washers. These are all used ones, and it looks like I've got 2 shiny ones and 2 rusty ones. So we'll put the shiny ones up front. Now, one thing else too, if you guys are going to run an Edelbrock carburetor with a 2111, which I'm assuming the new 2111 intakes are about the same height, you pair that with the Edelbrock 10-inch wide flat base air cleaner. You do clear the HEI distributor back here. I did stick a 14-inch on here, and it just looked weird. I think this looks more proportionate. I figure now it's time to do the inevitable and pull this gas tank out. Who knows how bad it is? I tried to find a replacement gas tank. I guess we're gonna have to try and salvage this one. But I was able to find fuel sending units and even fuel pumps. Believe it or not, these actually come from the factory with an electronic in-tank fuel pump. Let's bend these out of the way. Let's see another option. Oh, there it goes. Now this should have some wiring. There it is. Well, would you look at that? It's got just a simple plug-in. That's nice and easy. Wow. Anyway, tank's out. It actually doesn't look too bad. I was kind of worried that there might be some holes on the top, but it doesn't look like there are any. Actually looks not that bad. I might actually be able to reuse this. Let's see how bad the tank is. Oh, that's not that bad. Sweet. This tank's got almost no rust. I know it doesn't look great on camera, but it's gonna clean up really nice. Oh, it's just a little bit too small. But that one's the same size. Oh man, I guess my hands are just too big. Let's see what's on the bottom here. Oh, maybe not. Actually, that's pretty rough. Oh, come on. Get back out. Hang on. Let me grab some WD-40. WD on there. Oh no. Ah, there we go. Okay. Well, it's actually pretty stuck on there, that nastiness. So, we'll give it the works. This right here is probably about the easiest way I've found to clean a gas tank. Probably not the safest way to clean a gas tank. Strap your tank to something that rotates at a slow speed. Most of the tanks I've done, you know, you just put some cleaner in it, you put some chains in it, and then you just sit there and shake the thing back and forth by hand. And that's a good workout if that's what you're into, but man, it will wear you plumb out. So this works pretty good. We'll see how it turns out on this one. Now, one thing you should know before you go doing this is that if you used to have a good relationship with your neighbors, you don't anymore. Because once this puppy starts going, it's going to be pretty loud. I'll shut the door, and I'm going to actually leave the shop and maybe peek in through the window every once in a while, make sure that nothing catastrophic has happened. Well, another thing too is this will also clean up your chains. Chain number 2. Chain number 3. I don't know if more chains is necessarily better, but this is how many I have, so might as well use them. WD-40 works pretty good on sticky, nasty surfaces, and the chain is going to be the abrasive, so we'll just pour a little bit of WD-40 in there. I'm also going to put some seafoam in there. I reckon it'll help. Not sure if these things are safe to mix or not, but only one way to find out, right? And now, just out of curiosity, we'll also put some rubbing compound in there. This is some really fast cutting, pretty coarse rubbing compound, so we'll put a good helping of that in there too. So, if you look in there, there's a couple spots that are still a little wet, like right there. And those are spots where it's actually pitted. It looks rough, but it's not going to chunk off a bunch of debris and clog up the filter. The rest of the tank, though, is all pretty well debris-free, especially on any high spots, and then the corners look really nice. Who knows, maybe now we'll only have to change the filter once every month instead of every 2 minutes. What do you think, little buddy? Good as new? Yeah. Here's where I sorted out some of the wiring. I won't bore you guys with the details on this, but if you guys want to see in-depth videos on topics like this, let me know in the comments. Before I put this gas tank back in, a couple things I need to sort out here with the sending unit. I noticed that the fuel level gauge wasn't quite working right. It was showing full even whenever it was down in that position. So what you'll do is you'll take your multimeter, you put one lead here coming out of the sensor, and the other lead you'll put to ground, which is going to be here on the base. Ground it there, check that there. This one here should have 90 ohms max, and then it'll go down to, you know, close to 0 ohms. So that's exactly what I had whenever I checked it here, but whenever I moved my lead to where it goes to this little dude there, it had a bad connection right here. So I went ahead and tried to clean this up a little bit to get a better connection, and I did. This would have originally had this here electrical pump. It would have mounted like this and went down to the bottom of the tank. I'm not going to use this pump, even though I did test it and it actually still works. I don't really trust it long term, so out with that. And then here's just a tube that went in its place to go down to the bottom of the tank, and I will use an external fuel pump. That way it's just a little bit easier to service and fix things as they need done. And then I'll run a filter here instead that I can change. It's just a better design in my opinion. That way you don't have to take the whole tank down in order to get to this filter. You can just change the filter here. Well, since I've got the gas tank out of this car, I figured, you know what, let's go ahead and see if we can't do a quick patch here on pretty much what is the one rusty spot on this car, at least as far as I've found. Patch is in. I've got it welded all the way around. I'm pretty satisfied with it. I'm not going to grind down all the welds. Life's too short to sit here and grind away every single weld until it's flush with the panel. I'm raring to get this gas tank back in, so I'm going to call this good enough. I made a little patch for this as well. Weld looks really good right there. It looks pretty good from back here, and that's exactly how close I'm going to get. There was a nice little rust hole right here, and I put the carbide burr in there, opened it up till I hit some good metal. Kind of ended up finding another hole right there, so we'll have to patch it up real fast. This is going to be my fix for that. This is just a flat washer, and what I'm going to do is leave the open hole in the middle for my ground. So I'll run a bolt through this washer. I'll stick this through on the back side, hold it in with a magnet or a piece of tape or something, and we'll weld it in from the inside. All right, here we are, all done. So for this car, I opted to get one of these Edelbrock micro fuel pumps. I've yet to have one fail on me, and I've mounted them in lots of ways that the instructions say you're not supposed to. Also, on the package here, it says in the middle, can be used as a lift or transfer pump. I read that to mean that this can be mounted above the fuel level. But if you read the instructions, it says, do not mount above the fuel level. You should always mount it as low as you can, but let's be honest, a lot of times the fuel tank is the lowest point of the vehicle. I've ran these much above the fuel tank. I've put thousands of miles on cars like that and had no problems. I'll go ahead and crawl underneath here. I'll take you guys with me and see where I'm going to put this thing. My fuel line coming from the tank is way over here. It's going this direction, and then it will have to kind of do a loop-de-loop no matter where I put it. As you can see, there is really no section of frame rail or anything like that
to mount this to that's below the fuel tank level. I'm not gonna try and fit it over here because this is really tight. I think what I'm gonna do is probably mount it to the tank strap right here. And that would give me good access here for everything. And then my power wire, I'll have to extend it, but it'll go around. I'm just gonna reuse the original pump power supply. That'll be good enough. Like a glove. If you're doing the same thing I'm doing, I doubt it, but I did drill these out. The mounting holes on here were just a tiny bit smaller than 5/16, so I went ahead and drilled it out to 5/16 so I can use these 5/16 bolts. Now I've got some 3/8 hose, something like that, yeah. Spider on me. There's that one. Boom. Actually, that's probably going to be a little too long because I got to have the pump on there too. Okay. There we go. Boom. Will my washers fit on there? Do I need washers? Yeah, let's use the washers. Let's stick our nuts on there. Get out of here. Cool. It's not the best setup, but this will be quieter than hard mounting it. It should still be reasonably quiet. We're planning on running glass packs on this thing anyways, so I highly doubt you'll be able to hear the fuel pump. Right here is the wiring that would normally go to the oil pressure switch. It's what gives power to the fuel pump. For now, since I don't have the oil pressure switch that I need, I have one ordered just for a Vega. And it'll go into this engine just fine. This little wire here would supply power with the ignition on, and then the purple wire just goes to the starter trigger, and then the blue wire goes to the fuel pump. So right now I've just got these two jumped, basically doing what the oil pressure switch would be doing when we have oil pressure. Whenever I turn the key on, the fuel pump will turn on. When the oil pressure switch comes in, then the fuel pump will only turn on whenever you're cranking the engine or once the oil pressure switch is closed and you have oil pressure. If the switch ever fails on you, then you can just do this. Get yourself a little jumper wire, throw it in your glove box. Your switch fails, pop your little jumper in there and it'll get you home. Picked up fuel. It's already running clear. Should be good. All right, carburetor's primed. Got the accelerator pump. Thing fired right up. Sounds pretty good. Well, you guys, if you liked this video, keep an eye out for the next one, where I will be picking up where I left off. Big thanks to all the subscribers. You guys are the best. And as always, thanks for watching.